How's it going, everybody? This is Jordan Pacheco from the Glad Trad podcast. I hope you're doing well. Just wanted to make kind of a brief video because I think that we can all agree that these are extraordinarily historical times in the time of our nation and our history of our country. And that certainly has manifested itself politically. We have gone through a roller coaster of events in a relatively short span of time. Some of these events, the last time they've happened, have been separated by centuries, certainly decades. So you might think, oh no, Jordan's going to make another politic video like everyone else. Well, kind of not really. And I want just to kind of make a general note. So obviously this election cycle is very, very important. Don't worry, I'm not going to say vote for, I got my MAGA hat here, but whatever, that's a different story. But I just wanted to say it's very clear to me, and it's very clear to a growing amount of people, that the nation is sick, that we are headed towards a very unfortunate time in the history of our country, where it's very clear that neighbor is against neighbor. There are complete ideologies that are diametrically opposed to one another. I don't know how the Republic's going to stand all of this. I don't know if America, as we think of it, is going to last another 250 years approximately, as we have already. I'm not trying to be a doomsday kind of guy. I don't have a crystal ball. I'm not predicting really anything. I'm just saying it's very evident to me that there is a tale of two cities. There's a tale of two countries here. Oftentimes on this channel, we talk about a tale of two churches. And again, I think as we see sickness in culture, we can often see that as a sickness inside the church, right? Because as I think of the church fathers said, that the church was created the world was created for the sake of the church. And so if there's something wrong inside the church, then this obviously spreads down to the rest of our culture, especially here in the United States. So I've been really, really meditating and praying about what's going to happen in the next coming months. It's crazy that we had President Trump get shot at, actually attempted assassination. Who knows where we would have been? I've seen some people say that would have been the dawn. It would have been a psyop, a red flag to get us into World War III. Who knows if that's true or not? It's by grace of God that he survived that. Thank God. We have seen just today that President Biden has said that he's not going to seek re-election, but he is going to continue the office of the presidency up until January. So we'll see what happens in the developing coming days and months. People are saying, well, Kamala Harris is in, but it is clearly any man's game, and who knows what those yokels are going to try. And I've just been really thinking that, I'm glad that all this political turmoil that has spilled out, that has demonstrated this cultural rot. I think perhaps you could say the cultural rot actually just been made most manifest in the political sphere, right? But I'm glad that it's actually happening in our time where we're able to do something about it, instead of passing the blame on to our children. Something that I would personally say as a young man has been the motu proprio for decades at this point, kicking the ball down the road, right? So I've been really thinking, okay, so is this what it means? Are we the epitome of the constitutional republic? That's what we are. We are a constitutional federal republic. Is this what democracy is supposed to feel like? Do I feel free? Do I say to my fellow citizens that we are free? Well, the answer is kind of. I mean, certainly there are plenty of freedoms still to be had. America is a beautiful place. I was very, very blessed. I actually spent 4th of July in Kansas City visiting some family, and got front row seats to the 4th of July fireworks celebration on the block, which was massive fireworks because they're legal there in Kansas. And that was amazing, right? There was a very deep slice of Americana that I sort of remember from my childhood. Obviously, being an adult, you realize that sometimes you romanticize things that perhaps you shouldn't have, or you're nostalgic about something you can't fully remember. But there is a general sense, and I talk about it with a lot of my friends, especially friends like me who grew up in the countryside more, or even around Denver, actually, that there is a worry that maybe our best days are behind us. I don't know if that's true, because I think sometimes it's very easy to romanticize the past. And if you ever see my library, I have a ton of history books. If I wasn't doing this podcast, it'd probably be on military history or something. And so the good old days are often themselves accompanied by devastation as well. War, famine, plagues, poverty, social unrest, you name it. I just got out of a massive phase on World War I read books like Barbara Tuchman's The Guns of August, and I learned about the tragedy, all the elements that boiled into a war that many now say is senseless. And I agree with that to an extent, in which an entire generation of men died. And all for what? And also a war that killed the last of the ancient world, so to speak. It was because of World War I that the ground was set for World War II. The rise of these secular liberal democracies, the death of monarchies in Europe and eventually worldwide. The right, Woodrow Wilson's famous phrase, make safe the world for democracy. We're seeing that play out. We're seeing that manifested. And you understand now that there is a class, a ruling class, a body politique that's entire interest is power. And they don't really care about ordinary citizens. They actually don't care about citizens in general. To be a citizen is, if anything, sometimes a burden, a crutch, a demand that you instead pour yourself out, your patriotism, your citizenship, everything out for people who do not care about you or your customs, your cultures, your ways. There's got to be a better way to preserve it than America is doing in the 21st century. So we will see how this election unfolds. I'm not quite sure how it's all going to play out. I know who I'm voting for, obviously. Again, got a MAGA hat sitting over here from 2016. And I stand by it. But just a great reminder, I just wanted to give two big things. Number one, as Catholics, the question is, what should we do? There is something very positive I am seeing in this election cycle and just generally across the culture. Something is in the water, friends. I've talked about this a lot on this channel because Catholicism feels, strangely, in the ascendancy as far as public thought and opinion goes. A lot of the Supreme Court justices are Catholics. Whether they're good Catholics or not good Catholics is another story, but there you are. They tell me that the sitting president is a Catholic. Might have to see that baptismal certificate. J.D. Vance, Trump's VP nominee, is a convert Catholic. And of course, I've talked about very famous converts coming over. We've seen Shia LaBeouf and Candace Owens and the wife Tammy Peterson, amongst the countless others. In my own circles, I've seen people who've been away from the church for a while more interested. I've seen Catholics who I've grown up with who've been good conservative, just doing the thing, getting more interested in the richness, the truth, and the tradition of the Catholic faith. These are wonderful things. These things aren't going away. And considering this nation's history, you have to understand that as Catholicism feels, at least, and I believe is, in the ascendancy as far as public opinion goes, so we're going to see kind of the same old anti-Catholic rhetoric creep back in. Sometimes it's very difficult for people to remember, but only 100 years ago, right, you had guys like the governor of New York, Allan Smith, running as a wet Democrat, going to repeal prohibition. And if you look at that historical period, you will understand the vitriol that the anti-Catholic bias that was against him. You see all these, I think they're really kind of fun. They're kind of Puck magazine-esque, but all these political cartoons that Smith is going to dig a tunnel from here to Rome. He's going to unite Washington, D.C. and Rome. He's just going to be a Catholic, a papist plaything for the Pope at the time. And I like that, actually. I think that's that's a very high badge of honor we as Catholics can make, because as Catholics, we do have a duty to attempt our patriotism for our country. We should take pride and we should love our country, for this is the land which God has deigned that our salvation should be had in, right? He made you an American and me an American, or wherever you're watching in the world. He could have had us anywhere in the world, but this is our country. So there's a lot of things to love as well. So we might as well do our best to love our country. It doesn't mean that we are turning a blind eye to any problems of our country or of our leaders. It doesn't mean that we have to fall lockstep in when the nation state does a decision, but it means real patriotism, authentic patriotism, is to love your country. But like all love, you have to constantly keep a watchful eye that it doesn't give way to sloth or give way to lust. In this case, for patriotism, we have to make sure that our love of country and our love of our leaders doesn't have us turn a blind eye to bad policies and at times anti-Catholic policies. There are policies that are against the natural law even. So I will say this, as a Catholic who is voting for Donald Trump, it doesn't mean that I think Donald Trump is a pope, quite the opposite. Nor do I think that he is the greatest thing since sliced bread. Of course not. And while I might like him and I like a lot of his policies, I have made no qualms about the fact that I don't find Trump to be a particularly strong Christian. I think that there have been many policies that have been friendly to Christians, and their contemporary Republican Party has been considerably, leaps and bounds, way more friendly to authentic Christianity than certainly the Democratic Party. But that doesn't mean that the Republican Party and the Republican platform is just a purely Christian platform, obviously with the striking of conversations about gay marriage and abortion from the contemporary Republican Party's platforms that should raise concerns as Christians. But also it should just remind us that our loyalties ultimately do not lay with a man like Donald Trump, and it doesn't lay with a party like the Republicans or the Democrats, the Libertarians, whoever you want to quantify it. Maybe there's a Catholic conservative party. I think David Gray had created one or had joined one. I'll have to talk shop with him about that sometime. But ultimately, our loyalty, again, lies to Christ and to his church. And again, that doesn't mean that every word that the Pope says is gospel, that we turn a blind eye to our reason. It means that at the end of the day, we know where we plant our flags. Again, I talked about Allan Smith just a little bit earlier because as Catholics, our loyalties ultimately lay not with the principalities of this world, but rather with the kingdoms of the next world, right? Our ultimate loyalty is to God and is to heaven. So if you're really distressed as a Catholic in this voting cycle, I know there are some people who make it seem like if you don't vote, that it is somehow sinful. I find that ironic because when Italian unification was happening and the papacy, the papal states were lost, the Pope ordered Catholics not to vote in that first Italian election, that it was a sham election as far as the papacy was concerned. I'm not saying that whether that was the right policy or the wrong policy. I'm just trying to highlight that clearly democracy, the exercising of your democratic, quote unquote, constitutional right, I don't think is necessarily a matter of sin. And I would really be careful about any person, laity or prelate, who somehow tells you that if you decide to abstain from voting, you are being a bad Catholic. Now, we understand that there are podcasts who are way better than mine, certainly, that talk about different heresies. In our country, for Catholics, our heresy is called Americanism. And it was this compromise that was made for Catholics living here that essentially, to tone down Catholic persecution, Catholics had to explicitly or implicitly agree essentially that they weren't going to evangelize their Protestant or Jewish neighbors, that they were going to keep quiet, that ultimately they were going to conform to the culture of America, whatever that means at the time, and become good, productive citizens. You see this manifest even today. And that obviously is a heresy because there have been times in our nation's history, you even see it now with President Biden, right, where you can say that you're a good Catholic and that you pray the rosary and you still receive communion at your parish in Delaware for whatever reason. But you can have these absolutely anti-Catholic policies when it comes to abortion, when it comes to gay marriage, when it comes to many of these other sorts of things that are just obviously not even just anti-Catholic, but against the natural law, right? Reason can determine that these things are gravely wrong. Don't want to get into the weeds there. Again, greater podcasts than I can talk about that. But the last thing I wanted to just talk about is a bit of fun that I hope to have while politics is still on everyone's mind. And hopefully I can get Charles Cologne back on, because there's a book that I've often talked about when it comes to politics, a great curious question. So again, we are a federal republic, right? We're a representative democracy, and that has been doing for us relatively well with some very big hiccups here and there for the last 250 years. It should be a very impressive history of our nation state. And you oftentimes find traditional Catholics espousing the ideas of monarchy. And for a lot of people who might be relatively new to what that means, if they don't live under a monarch such as maybe the king in Britain, for instance, then they might be very confused by this. It might just seem like we're just LARPing online. So I have called myself a monarchist. I think that constitutional monarchy probably is the most natural state to people. But inside that, I like the idea essentially as the medieval state had it, where I do think that kings should be beholden, of course, to their people, because it is ultimately their people that God has given them to rule. But kings also are beholden to God, and that in that relation, that the church should be established as the religion of the nation state. Not that the church gets to dictate all the rules to the government, but rather that the church and the state work together. So I wanted to recommend this book that's really fun. If you're just kind of sick of all the politicking for a second, and I know there are plenty of people that are, I would recommend this. This is a book called Star Spangled Crown. It's by Charles Cologne. And it's a very, very funny book here. I'm going to read the back of it for you because I think you should totally pick it up. You can just type this on Amazon. I usually get a bunch of copies and send them to friends. But Charles Cologne is kind of proposing it's a twist on historical fiction in the future and sort of political theory, what would happen if a monarchy arose in the United States of America? What would that actually look like? So let me read the back of it real quick. For 240 years, most Americans have identified our country with its government as the embodiment of freedom and the nation itself. Take away the Constitution, Congress, and presidential elections, and not only liberty, but the United States themselves would vanish. Or would they? We have a government that imposes social change from above at breakneck speed, while each presidential election seems to offer more and more pathetic choices than the one before. Many are scratching their heads and wondering, not just where are we going, but how did we get here? Is our governmental system itself, the leading symbol of the American way of life, heading for a meltdown? And if it is, what, if anything, shall be left of our country? Star-Spangled Crown is a book that comes to us from over a century in the future. That feared meltdown has already occurred, but these United States survived the loss of the presidency. Erected on the ruins of our current regime, a monarchy has emerged, contrary to all of our 21st century notions. It is a thoroughly American institution. How it functions, as and where all governments, including our present one, must function, is the subject of the book. So great kind of read. There's a lot of really fun quips. Again, it feels like it is, as Charles said, it takes place kind of a century in the future after this tremendous war and all these political shenanigans. And what would an American monarchy look like? I think actually it'd be a great foundation for kind of a fun what if sort of mini series or something like that. But that's something in the future. So the point I'm trying to make is the reason why I think that this time kind of calls to mind a question of other forms of government is just because we are seeing our own form of government come off at the wheels. And while 250 years is a very storied history in terms of a nation, there are other nations that have lasted longer than ours. And I'm not saying, therefore, that we all should just bow and crown Trump or Biden or Kamala or something like that. But I wonder, I suppose, and this may be a conversation we're going to be having on this channel in the next couple of months, what are the tenets of good Catholic monarchy and other forms of government? It doesn't have to just be monarchy, but if you were to create a federal republic, right? I do believe it was one of the Gordon brothers, Timothy Gordon. He wrote a book called Catholic Republic, where he was making the argument that America was founded not just as a Christian nation, but on very Catholic roots with a lot of Catholic thought put behind. I haven't had the chance to read it, but I have watched him making the circuit on podcasts when that book came out fresh. So I'll have to revamp my memory. Maybe I can have him on too. And just want to explore very openly, what is the purpose of government? What is the purpose of the church as it relates to government, and vice versa? What's the purpose of government as it relates to the true religion, the Catholic faith? And what system is best for people and the longevity and the flourishing, ultimately, of the citizenry of a nation? That's a very, very interesting question for me. And considering the kind of turmoil that we're in right now, I think it's a very fair question to ask. It doesn't mean I'm going to start out in the street LARPing, demanding that the Holy Roman Empire be resurrected, although that'd be a good idea if I trusted any Europeans to lead, quite frankly. But it's still just a very interesting kind of thing. So this video, I know, is all over the place when it comes to the question of politics, but I just wanted to kind of offer maybe just a little break, and as Catholics, just to remind ourselves that ultimately we are citizens of heaven. Our baptism makes it that, as St. Thomas More said, right, we may be the king's good servant, but we're God's first. And so as the next couple of months unfold, it is important. You can see my battle rosary. Oh, over here. There it is. My battle rosary hanging in the background. That's the weapon that we've been given in order to fight against the evil that may manifest itself in our culture. And that is ultimately something higher than the realm of politics that we're called to. We're called to a life of prayer and fasting for our leaders and for the decisions that they make that's going to affect each and every one of us. And so just a great reminder once more that if you're not already praying for the leaders of the nation, if you're not already praying for the health of the nation, that is something that you should be doing. Again, God has let us live here. This is our homeland. It wasn't someplace else. And so while we're here on this side of heaven in this particular nation, we may as well do our part and at least pray for her health and pray that she has a reversion. America does need a full conversion back to the fullness of the truth. It needs a reversion to God and to have an utter repentance from all the absolutely absurd and dark sins that we've been committing, some of them ever since our inception. So just a little bit of food for thought. Again, pick up Star Spangled Crown. I'm definitely going to try to have Charles on, especially while he's back in the States, to talk about it. And as Padre Pio says, right? Pray, hope, and don't worry. So until next time, I'm Jordan Pacheco. God bless you and may he keep you. Adios.